Okay.
Okay, and I'm Jamie Childress. The folks on the presentation know me already, so we're going to talk about FERPA today. And FERPA's been around a long time. It is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. It's almost 50 years old, and it was put into place to protect our students. So, FERPA provides four basic rights for our students: to view and inspect their academic records. So whatever we have on file, they can actually look at what's in their record. That does not give them the right to see a letter of recommendation that they've already waived their access to. It does not give them the ability to look at their parents' financial records in financial aid. So there are a couple of caveats with that, but basically their academic record they can always view and look at. FERPA gives students the right to amend those records or challenge those records, and if the institution doesn't agree with the challenge, then the student can put a note or statement in the record. The most prominent reason you hear about FERPA is the student's right to disclose their academic record or not to disclose it. And lastly, FERPA gives students the right to complain to DC if we're not following the guidelines. But far and above the consent to disclose the student's academic records is what's referenced when we talk about FERPA. So when did the FERPA rights begin? They begin for all students as soon as they enroll at the college. So any student is covered by FERPA when they turn 18 years of age or they enroll in an institution of higher education at any age. That means all our CCP students, our early college students who could be 14 years old are covered by FERPA. Our Con Ed students, special credit, they're all covered. So you'll hear a lot about directory information with FERPA, and directory information is the information that can be released without the student's consent. So it's basic information that could be the student's name and address, their email address, their phone number, their program of study, but the institution can define directory information. And students can always request that we not release that directory information. If we define directory information, then we have to have a way for the students to let us know that they don't want it released. So we have that. You just have to come to my office or see VP Hoyle. Our college defines directory information as their name, major, enrollment periods, hours earned, degrees awarded, honors, and their county of residence. So you'll notice there's nothing there about an email address. There's nothing there about their physical address, their mailing address, or their phone number. We did that about 15 years ago in order to prevent our students from being hounded and us having to give out information for marketers. So they're not going to get a whole bunch of spam because we released their email address or anything. When is prior consent not required? Well, we've already talked about one, but another is for school officials with a legitimate educational need to know. So let's say a student wants to take overload hours. Well, in order to get approval, we're going to have to go back into that student's record, and VP Hoyle is going to want to know, well, what's his GPA? How has he done other semesters? Why does he need to take more than 19 hours a semester? Or there may be that Dean Willett is looking into a Title IX violation. And she may say, is there any type of history? Let's look at this. So any school official with a legitimate educational interest or need to know can look at those records. And school official means our school, not an outside school, okay? We can also allow authorized organizations who are doing studies to improve instruction, kind of like when Aspen came to see us, or for SAC COC when we're pulling documentation for them. Obviously, our auditor at the system office could view a student's file also. If a parent has provided their tax return as verification of dependent status of that student, then we would release information. As a faculty member or advisor, you shouldn't have to get that deep in the weeds. If we have to comply with a judicial court order or a subpoena, those come to my office since I'm the custodian of records, and typically they have to have a subpoena. A lawyer doesn't just get to say, we need a copy of the transcript. They've got to supply me with a subpoena. We also will release for a health or safety emergency. So COVID's a good example. If we had a major hotspot outbreak and all of a sudden we had 600 students who were actually sick with COVID, we would want to be able to notify others and look at their schedule. Where have they been? Who have they come in contact with? Also, any individual requesting only directory information. I showed you what our college defines as directory information. That sometimes frustrates folks with the Freedom of Information Act because they don't get anything to use to go harass our students. I actually run the report a couple times a semester and just have the email as a template to send out and say, this is what we define, here you go. And there's nothing for them to contact the student. There's no way without doing a lot of legwork that they could find the student. Also, we will release to anyone who's named on a release of information form. So those forms are available here in Student Services, either with my office. The admissions folks have access to them. We do prefer that they be signed here because we will actually prod the student a little. Are you sure you want to do this? Not just because mom is standing behind you. So it has to be signed in front of a staff member, and it's good for 1 year only. We do require a password, and we tell the student that if mom is going to want to know about records, mom's going to need to know the password. And we've done these through COVID. We have them sign virtually online and then send it to us. So we're actually asking them while they're on the camera, and we're watching them. They point the camera down and sign the document. A couple of caveats of that, even when we release information, we never release grades over the phone. We don't release access to get into WebAdvisor or Blackboard. If a student wants a parent to know that information, the student will share it with the parent. At the post-secondary level, parents have no right to actually go look at that academic record. It is the sole right of the student. And there's a lot of verbiage on this, folks. So if you glaze over, don't worry, you're not going to hurt my feelings, okay? If a faculty member receives a request from a parent for access to non-directory information, meaning they want to know what the student got on their last test, or they're insisting that they know how many questions they missed on their homework. As an instructor or faculty advisor, please direct them to us. You shouldn't have to deal with that. Quite honestly, it's really, you've got enough on your plate. I know, I've been there, okay? So if they're being unreasonable, we will talk to them. And even for a high school student, a lot of times it's just easier for you as a faculty member to let an administrator talk to that parent. There is a special note on troubled students. So FERPA doesn't prevent us from sharing if we think a student is in distress. And we can share that with either, a counselor or a safety officer. If you think one of your students may have some issues, by all means, contact security, our director of admissions, any of the admissions specialists. They have the resources at the tip of their fingertips to assist those students. The exception actually comes from the verbiage, if a health or safety emergency exists and the information will help resolve it, then we can release it. So even when a student is in distress, that is a safety emergency for the student. Email records. Okay, these screens are kind of long. Basically, it is a little gray, but you should keep registration records for a full year. After that, you can delete them permanently. Now, Department of Ed has said, okay, they gave us a very long-winded answer when we've asked about it in the past about actual emails back and forth. And they said, when there's an email message between faculty and or staff that's identifiable of the student, then that message becomes part of the educational record. If you're just talking about a note, like I need to meet with Johnny for his advising session, then no, it is not. But if you're specifically sending grades over email, which is not recommended, then that could be considered an educational record. Okay, some specific issues for our faculty. Posting grades is not recommended. And I'll give you some caveats if there's some reason why you absolutely feel like you have to post grades outside your office door. Number one, you cannot have the student's name. You cannot have the student's ID number. You cannot have the student's social security number. You cannot even have the last four of the student's social security number. You cannot have the student's login, user ID. You would have to randomly assign some sort of code to the student. I don't care if you call them red, purple, green, if you call them zebra, lion, beaver, but there would have to be, or if you randomized and said A1, 2, 3, you could post grades, but you could not then post them alphabetically because other class members would know if it was alphabetized. So basically, use Blackboard. Let the student check their grades in Blackboard or Aviso or WebAdvisor. And then you don't have to worry about it. Letters of recommendation. If you're only writing about personal traits, things you've noticed about the student, then you're all good. But if you start saying, Johnny was an exceptional writer, was always developed a strong thesis, and earned an A in my English 111 class, then you have provided specifics and personal information that then becomes part of the educational record. Okay, I got through the basics. Now I thought you guys might like some scenarios and what ifs. So, a parent calls and wants to know if her son's been attending class regularly. Can you respond? Anybody want to jump in?
No.
Amy, absolutely correct. You cannot. Without a FERPA release form or proof of their dependency status, you can't tell them whether their son was in class or not. A 16-year-old student enrolls in your class and the parents want to know about her grades and participation. They remind you that she's a minor and they are the parents. Can you tell them? That's right, Audra. Without the FERPA release form or proof of their dependency, you cannot. And that's a good plan, Amy, to check. But now remember, we only allow 1 year also on that. So you're handling a grant at your institution for first-generation students studying mathematics. Can you request the non-directory names, email addresses, grades, GPAs, and other information for these students? No guesses? Actually, you can, because it relates to the grant and it would be for our institution. So I received a subpoena for someone who's on your class roster for your seated Psych 150 class at 10 a.m. The subpoena is asking for a copy of the entire roster. Do I release it? Actually, I have to, okay? That kind of, a court summons or subpoena overrides FERPA. A special credit student is taking a history class during the summer semester on an audit basis. They just love history. Does FERPA apply to this student since their credit will not be transferable? Yes. FERPA applies to everyone, okay? If I've got a record on the student, any type of academic record, then FERPA applies. A student wants copies of all materials in their student file in the registrar's office, plus all material their advisor has on them in their advising file. Is that permissible? Actually, it is, but it's not required, okay? FERPA gives them the right to look at their records and to challenge them. It doesn't say I have to make copies for them, but if we do, then we can actually charge for those copies. And no, they don't get to come in and take pictures of the file either. Right? So your neighbor has retired from the college. They were here 20 years. Your neighbor taught in the same thing that you teach, same subject matter. She mentions that she's been tutoring a young man from her church who's in your class and struggling with the material. She says she read his paper last night and then asked you what she should do to help him improve his grade. Can you discuss this with her? Absolutely not. Okay? Even if it's readily apparent that she's been working with him without a FERPA release specifically naming her, you cannot talk to her. So, who's got questions?
Hey, Jamie, I have questions.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm looking at the FERPA policy on the registrar's webpage, and I have two questions because something has always puzzled me. So there's a section that says students may not have access to the following information. And my two questions are, why don't they have access to law enforcement records about themselves and the medical psychiatric records are similar records in connection with the treatment of the student?
So it's almost like double certification, if you will.
Okay.
Or that's not the best way to say it. We are certifying that this, if we gave out those records, then it would be like we were certifying that they were accurate.
Okay.
So
and
they have to get those records from the law enforcement agency.
Okay. That makes sense. Okay. That makes sense. Thank you, Jamie.
You're very welcome. I explain to people, it's almost like when a student asks me, can I get a copy of my high school transcript that I gave you? I'm like, no, I'm sorry, you cannot. I can't certify that that is an official high school transcript to another institution. I certified it came from your high school, but they can't take it from me. Okay, they have to get it from the high school.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that's a good example. That does make sense.
Good deal. Any other questions? Oh, there's a lot of chats down there. Oh, that's just the yeses and nos right now. Yeah. Nobody has any other questions? Really?
I mean, I have one other question, which I'm really curious about.
Okay.
And you might have covered it earlier. So I know in reading about FERPA that sometimes directory information can be more expanded than what we have. By the way, I love what we are only allowed to give out, but how did we decide to give out slightly less information?
So the nuances of FERPA say, if you define your own directory information, number one, you have to list what it is. It has to be public of what that directory information is, and the student has to know that they can opt out of it.
Okay. That's
so
cool.
yeah, so we do have a form for students to opt out, and they get to opt out for 1 year, just like they get to allow someone to view their records for 1 year. I mean, how many of us would really want our parents looking at our record, for perpetuity,
Yeah.
There are some things they may not need to know. But that's why we have the 1 year clause. But actually, my predecessor, Amy, pushed this with VP Hoyle, Michelle Wheeler, when we first started our electronic record policy, which we started for co-op back in probably 2003, 2004. We were one of the first ones to adopt an electronic signature policy, which really helped us during COVID. But back about the same time, email was becoming more prevalent. We were getting more requests. Everybody wanted to know the student's email address. And so right about the time we went from GroupWise to Gmail was when we changed that policy to define directory information as only their county of residence. And it was intended to thwart people trying to get lists for marketing. And even when I send a list of students to RV, I run them through to see if we have a do not release on file for them first, because there is a way to actually do that in colleague. I'm sure some of you may have seen a pop-up over the student's name that says do not release any information. I can tell you that on occasion that lasts longer than a year, because sometimes it has to. I actually had a student come through who was in the witness protection agent program. So.
Well, thank you, Jamie, because I really like it, because I know other colleges even will release like their full address information. That just makes me very nervous. So I like what we have.
And even with our MOUs, Amy, where we have agreed to share email information, we only send them their school email address, which retires or sunsets after 4 months of non-enrollment.
Oh, that's really good. That's another important way to protect our students.
Yep. And then it reactivates if they become a student again. It reactivates automatically after they enroll, after they register or send in a new application.
That's really helpful. Thanks, Jamie.
Sure. Are there any other questions? I had someone ask me one the other day, and she asked me if she was being too hard on or too rigid, and I said, I doubt it. I'm going to stop sharing my PowerPoint so you can see my face, maybe. But they said, I had a student that was trying to tell me why he couldn't submit work, and he is, on the golf team, and how far in advance do they know when their matches are? Well, all of our athletes have a schedule. And so just because what's the best way to say this? Okay, so Amy, you actually advise students, and so does Linda, right? So just because Linda sees Tommy come into your office and knows him by face because he's your advisee, you shouldn't necessarily share anything about Tommy with Linda because she's not his advisor, nor is she his instructor.
True.
If there's a real need to know, an educational need to know, yes, but just out of curiosity or chit chat, no. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Well, and that's everything. I think we get really comfortable in our roles, and we do sometimes talk about our concerns with students. And you know, you may want to talk to your office mate. I used to share an office with Diane Canar, and I would see her frustrated with her students. She would see me frustrated with my students. But while you may discuss a situation, you can't share names or any specific personal information if there's no true educational need to know. Now, it would be different if you were going to your supervisor, or you know, if you're going to the dean of advising, how do I advise the student? Or if you're going to your department chair, the student had to withdraw, is there any way we can sub this class? So even though your department chair might not teach that class, there is an educational need to know. It's just kind of thinking about the relative nature of what you're discussing and the person with whom you're discussing it. Any other questions?
And Jamie has also shared this PowerPoint in PDF form, so I will email this to y'all as soon as we finish up today.
Well, thank you, everyone. I started a minute late, but I'm done on time.
Awesome. Thank you, Jamie. And if y'all need to go back to this video, it will be posted on PD Blackboard by the end of today.
Yes. Happy Thanksgiving. You all know how to reach me by GChat, phone, email, or you can walk over. I'm still in my office. Thank you.